The vanishing hitchhiker Jake and his three best friends, Mark, Lisa, and Emily, had been planning their road trip for months. They had mapped out every stop, packed all their snacks, and made playlists for the long drive. The plan was to explore different states, visit famous landmarks, and make memories that would last a lifetime. Little did they know, this trip would give them a story they would never forget, a story none of them would ever want to tell again. They had been driving for hours on a lonely highway surrounded by thick woods. The sun had set, and the rain had started to fall heavily. The road was slick, and the only light came from their car's headlights. It was the kind of night where every shadow seemed to move, and the sound of the rain against the windshield created an eerie rhythm. Lisa was in the passenger seat, keeping Jake company while he drove. Mark and Emily were in the back, dozing off. "How much longer until we reach the next town?" Lisa asked, rubbing her tired eyes. Jake glanced at the GPS. "About 30 minutes," he said. "Hopefully, we can find a motel or something. I'm exhausted." Just then, something caught Lisa's eye. "Jake, slow down," she exclaimed. Jake slammed on the brakes. There, on the side of the road, stood a young woman. She was completely drenched, her long hair sticking to her pale face. She wore a white dress, now soaked from the rain, and she looked lost and helpless. "Oh my God," Emily whispered, now fully awake. "Should we help her?" Mark sat up and frowned. "I don't know. It's kind of creepy. What if it's a trap?" Lisa shot him a glare. "Come on, Mark. She's alone and soaking wet. We can't just leave her out here." Jake sighed and pulled over. He rolled down his window. "Hey, do you need a ride?" The woman didn't answer right away. She just stared at them with an empty expression. Then, in a soft voice, she whispered, "Thank you." She opened the back door and slid in next to Mark. The car filled with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something faint but unsettling, like old flowers. Jake glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Where are you headed?" She spoke quietly. "Just a little further down the road. I'll tell you where to stop." Her voice was barely audible over the sound of the rain. Mark, uncomfortable, pressed himself against the door, giving her space. Lisa tried to make conversation. "What were you doing out here all alone?" The woman didn't answer. Lisa tried again. "Do you live nearby?" Still, no response. The woman just stared straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. A heavy silence filled the car. Mark shot Lisa a look that said, "I told you this was a bad idea," but it was too late now. The drive continued in silence, with only the sound of raindrops hitting the car. Every now and then, Jake glanced in the rearview mirror, but the woman barely moved. Her wet dress clung to her body, and her hair dripped water onto the seat. After about 10 minutes, she finally spoke. "Here. Stop here." Jake pulled over in front of an old house. The place looked like it had been standing there for decades. The paint was peeling, and the windows were dark. The house seemed abandoned. Jake turned around to tell the woman they had arrived, but she was gone. The back door hadn't opened. There was no sound, no movement. 1 second she had been there, and the next, she had vanished. "No way," Mark whispered, his face pale. Emily's voice shook. "Where did she go?" Lisa gasped. "The seat. It's still wet." A chill ran through all of them. Without thinking, Jake jumped out of the car and ran to the house. The others hesitated before following him. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding. After a few moments, an elderly man answered. His eyes were tired, and he looked like he had just woken up. Can I help you? Jake hesitated. Sorry to bother you, but we just gave a woman a ride here. She was young, had long dark hair, and wore a white dress. We stopped here, and then she disappeared. The man's face went pale. His hands trembled slightly. Describe her again. Lisa stepped forward. She was quiet, looked kind of sad, soaking wet when we picked her up. The old man's eyes filled with tears. That's my daughter, he said, his voice shaking. She died 10 years ago, right on that road. Silence fell between them. Emily clutched Mark's arm. Jake swallowed hard. What happened to her? The man wiped his eyes and took a deep breath. She was coming home late one night. It was raining, just like tonight. She lost control of her car and crashed into a tree. She didn't make it. Lisa covered her mouth with her hands. Oh my God. The man nodded. You're not the first to see her. Every few years, someone stops and brings her here. She always disappears before they can say goodbye. Jake took a step back, his legs feeling weak. That's impossible. The old man gave them a sad smile. Thank you for bringing her home. Without another word, Jake and his friends rushed back to the car. They got in quickly, locking the doors. The inside of the car felt colder than before. The back seat was still damp where the woman had been sitting. Jake started the engine, and they sped off down the road, none of them daring to look back at the house. No one spoke for a long time. The reality of what had happened settled over them like a heavy blanket. Finally, Emily broke the silence. We just gave a ride to a ghost. Lisa shivered. Do you think she'll ever find peace? No one had an answer. They drove through the night, the rain still falling around them. But inside the car, it was silent. Each of them knew they would never forget the vanishing hitchhiker, the girl who had asked for a ride home, only to disappear into the night, leaving behind nothing but a wet seat and an unforgettable story. The mysterious car Lisa and Mark had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. They had planned a peaceful getaway, just the two of them, driving through quiet country roads and staying in small, cozy motels. It was a break from their busy lives, and they were excited about the adventure. That evening, they were on a lonely stretch of highway, far from the city. The sun had long since set, leaving only the moonlight to cast eerie shadows along the road. The radio played softly, and the gentle hum of the car engine filled the silence between them. I love road trips at night, Lisa said, leaning back in her seat. It's peaceful, Mark chuckled. As long as we don't run into anything spooky. These roads feel like the start of a horror movie. Lisa rolled her eyes. Don't start with that. You know I get paranoid. Mark smiled and reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Relax, babe. It's just us and the open road. But a few minutes later, their peace was disturbed. Lisa glanced at the rearview mirror and frowned. Mark, there's a car behind us. Mark looked in the mirror. A dark vehicle was trailing them, barely visible against the night sky. So what? It's just another car, he said. Lisa shook her head. It doesn't have its headlights on. That was odd. Who drives on a dark road without headlights? Mark kept an eye on the mirror, expecting the car to pass them or turn off at the next intersection. But as the minutes passed, it stayed behind them, matching their speed, never getting closer, but never falling back either. This is weird, Lisa whispered. Mark agreed. Maybe they don't realize their lights are off? Should I flash my high beams at them? Lisa hesitated. I don't know. What if they're doing it on purpose? The uneasy feeling in the car grew stronger. Mark slowed down slightly, hoping the car would pass them. Instead, it slowed down too. When he sped up, the car did the same. Okay, now this is getting creepy, Mark muttered. Lisa grabbed her phone. I'm calling 911. She quickly explained the situation to the dispatcher, her voice shaking slightly. Whatever you do, don't stop, the dispatcher said firmly. Keep driving. We're sending officers your way. Lisa's heart pounded. Mark, they said not to stop. Just keep going. Mark tightened his grip on the wheel. I wasn't planning on stopping anyway. The car behind them suddenly sped up, closing the distance between them. It was now so close that Lisa could see its shadowy outline in the mirror. Mark, they're getting closer. Mark gritted his teeth and pushed the gas pedal down. The car surged forward, but the mysterious vehicle kept up. What do they want? Lisa cried. Mark didn't answer. His mind raced with possibilities. Was it just some reckless driver messing with them? Or was it something worse? As they flew down the empty road, Lisa's phone rang. It was the dispatcher again. We have officers stationed at a gas station up ahead. Don't stop until you see them. Lisa relayed the message to Mark, who nodded and kept driving, his eyes fixed on the road. Minutes felt like hours. The car behind them stayed dangerously close, but it never tried to pass them. It was as if it was toying with them, waiting for the right moment. Then, finally, in the distance, they saw flashing red and blue lights. Relief washed over them. There, the gas station. Lisa pointed ahead. Mark didn't slow down until they were just a few feet away. As they turned into the lot, the mysterious car behind them suddenly braked hard, reversed, and disappeared down a side road. A uniformed officer rushed to their car as they parked. Are you two okay? He asked. Lisa and Mark were breathless. That car, it was following us, Lisa exclaimed. The officer nodded grimly. We've had reports of a vehicle like that before. He walked around to inspect their car. That's when he noticed something chilling. There were deep, jagged scratches on the trunk. You were lucky, the officer said, his voice serious. This is the third report this month of a car like that. People who stop usually aren't heard from again. Lisa's stomach twisted. What? What happens to them? The officer shook his head. We don't know. But whatever it is, you don't want to find out. Mark and Lisa exchanged a horrified glance. Their relaxing road trip had just turned into a nightmare. I think we should go home, Mark said. Lisa nodded. Yeah, I don't want to be out here any longer. They thanked the officer, got back in their car, and turned around, heading back toward the city. The night no longer felt peaceful. Every shadow felt darker, every passing car more suspicious. They never found out who or what was in that unmarked car, and they never wanted to. For months after that night, Lisa would still check the rearview mirror more often than before, and every time she saw headlights in the dark, a cold shiver ran down her spine, reminding her of the night they had barely escaped something far worse than just a bad driver. The gas station attendant Tom and Sarah had been on the road for hours, driving through long, empty highways surrounded by forests and open fields. The sun had just set, leaving behind a deep blue sky sprinkled with stars. They were heading to Sarah's parents' house for the weekend, looking forward to a peaceful time away from the city. The drive had been smooth so far, but the gas gauge was running low. Tom checked the dashboard and sighed. We need to stop soon, he said, glancing at Sarah. We're almost out of gas. Sarah nodded. looking at the dark road ahead. I think I saw a sign a few miles back. There should be a gas station nearby. Sure enough, a few minutes later, they saw the flickering lights of an old gas station up ahead. It looked isolated, with only one gas pump and a small convenience store attached. The building looked worn down, as if it had been there for decades without much maintenance. A single bulb above the store entrance flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. "This place looks creepy," Sarah muttered, shivering slightly. "Are you sure we should stop here?" Tom chuckled. "We don't have a choice." "Well, just get some gas and leave. It'll be fine." He pulled up to the pump, turned off the engine, and stepped out of the car. The night air was cool, carrying a faint smell of gasoline and damp earth. Sarah stayed inside, tapping her fingers nervously on the dashboard. A tall man with piercing eyes and a weathered face walked out of the store. He wore a faded uniform and a name tag that was too worn to read. He approached the car slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel. "Need gas?" he asked in a low voice. Tom nodded. "Yeah, fill it up, please." The man gave a slight nod and reached for the gas pump. As he started filling the tank, he leaned in slightly and spoke in a hushed voice. "You need to come inside. There's something wrong with your credit card." Tom frowned. "That's strange. Are you sure?" Sarah, who had been watching from inside the car, tensed up. Something about the man's expression made her uneasy. "Yeah, I ran it, and there's an issue. You should come check it out," the man insisted, his voice firm but quiet. Tom hesitated, looking back at Sarah. She shook her head slightly, her instincts telling her something wasn't right. But they needed gas, and if there was an issue with the card, he had to fix it. "I'll be right back," he told Sarah before turning to follow the man inside. The moment Tom stepped into the small convenience store, the man quickly shut the door behind him and locked it. Tom's stomach dropped. "What's going on?" he asked, his heart pounding. The man turned to him, his expression serious. "There's nothing wrong with your card. I just needed to get you away from your car." "Look outside." Confused and alarmed, Tom rushed to the window. His blood ran cold. A figure was crouching by the passenger side of the car. He was dressed in dark clothing, and in his hand, a glint of silver, a knife. Sarah was still inside, unaware of the danger just feet away from her. Tom's breath caught in his throat. "Oh my God," he whispered. The gas station attendant grabbed a wooden bat from behind the counter and pushed open the door. "Stay here," he ordered before running outside, yelling at the man with the knife. The stranger turned his head, his face hidden by a hood. The moment he saw the attendant charging toward him, he bolted, disappearing into the woods behind the gas station. Tom rushed out to Sarah, who had finally noticed something was wrong. She was shaking as she unlocked the door and stumbled out. "What? What happened?" she stammered. Tom pulled her into a tight hug, his heart still racing. There was a man outside by the car. He had a knife. Sarah's eyes widened in horror. "What?" The gas station attendant returned, his breathing heavy. "He's gone for now, but you need to leave. Now." Tom turned to the man, still trying to process everything. "Who was that? Do you know him?" The attendant wiped his forehead and shook his head. "No idea, but people disappear around here. This isn't the first time something like this has happened." Sarah shivered and grabbed Tom's arm. "Let's go." "Now." Tom nodded and quickly paid for the gas. They jumped into the car, locking the doors immediately. As they pulled away from the gas station, Sarah kept looking over her shoulder, half expecting the hooded man to appear again. They drove in silence for a while, the tension in the car thick. Finally, Sarah spoke. "We're never stopping at a gas station like that again. Ever." Tom gripped the steering wheel tightly. Agreed. That night, they didn't stop until they reached Sarah's parents' house, safe and far away from the lonely gas station on the dark, empty road. They never spoke about the incident again, but neither of them ever forgot the warning. People disappear around here. The wrong turn Danny and his friends had been planning this road trip for months. It was supposed to be an exciting adventure, just a group of friends exploring new places, enjoying the open road, and making memories. They had packed snacks, made a playlist of their favorite songs, and even brought a map, just in case. The group consisted of Danny, his best friend Mark, Mark's sister Lily, and their childhood friend Jason. They had been friends since high school and had gone on many small trips together. This time, they decided to take a longer journey, driving through small towns and scenic routes, away from the busy highways. Everything was going well until the Jeepus started acting up. They had been following its directions for hours, but suddenly, it rerouted them onto a narrow road that didn't seem right. "Are you sure this is the way?" Danny asked, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Mark, who was in charge of navigation, frowned. "That's what the GPS says. Maybe we should turn around," Lily suggested, looking out the window at the dense forest surrounding them. Jason, always the adventurous one, laughed. "Come on, where's your sense of adventure? It's just a detour." But as they kept driving, the road got worse. It changed from pavement to gravel, and then to dirt. The trees grew taller and thicker, blocking out the sunlight. The air felt colder, and an eerie silence settled around them. "This doesn't feel right," Danny muttered. He slowed the car down. "Let's check the map." Mark pulled out an old paper map they had brought as a backup. He unfolded it and ran his finger over the roads. "This road isn't even on here." Lily's voice was shaky. "Then where are we?" Before anyone could answer, they spotted a dim light up ahead. As they got closer, they saw an old wooden cabin with flickering lights inside. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a rusty mailbox stood at the edge of the driveway. "Maybe someone there can help us," Jason said. Danny hesitated. Something about the place felt off. It looked too old, too abandoned, yet the lights were on. But they were lost, and they had no phone signal. What other choice did they have? He pulled up in front of the cabin, and they all got out. The wooden steps creaked as they walked up to the door. Jason knocked. A moment later, the door opened, and an old woman stood there. She was small and frail, with deep wrinkles and piercing eyes. She smiled, but something about her smile felt wrong. "Lost?" she asked in a voice that was both gentle and eerie. Danny swallowed hard. "Ah, yeah. We took a wrong turn. Do you know how to get back to the main road?" The woman tilted her head, her smile never fading. "Oh, it's late. Come inside. Have some food first." Lily took a step back. "No, we just need directions." The woman's eyes twinkled. "Nonsense, dears. You must be tired. Come, come." She opened the door wider, revealing a warm, dimly lit interior. A wooden table was set with plates and bowls of food, freshly cooked, steaming. The smell was strong, but something about it was unpleasant, like something rotten was hiding beneath the spices. Danny felt a chill. Something was wrong. "We really should get going," he said, trying to sound polite. Jason, however, stepped inside. "Just for a minute," he said. "It's cold out here." Mark followed reluctantly, and after a moment, Danny and Lily did too. The cabin was small and cluttered, filled with old furniture and dusty bookshelves. The walls were covered with faded photographs. Danny glanced at the pictures and felt his stomach drop. Every single photo showed different people, their faces twisted in fear. Some were mid-scream, others had wide, horrified eyes. They weren't old pictures. They were recent. His heartbeat quickened. He grabbed Mark's arm. "We need to leave. Now." Mark frowned. "What? Why?" Danny whispered. "Look at the pictures." Mark turned his head, and his face paled. Lily gasped. Jason, who had been about to sit down at the table, finally noticed them too. "What the?" The old woman suddenly moved, faster than they thought possible. She reached out and grabbed Danny's wrist, her grip stronger than it should have been for someone her size. "Stay," she hissed. Danny yanked his arm away. "Run!" he shouted. They bolted for the door. The woman let out a terrible screech and lunged after them, but they were already outside. Danny fumbled with his car keys, his hands shaking. "Come on, come on." Jason jumped into the front seat, while Mark and Lily scrambled into the back. As soon as Danny got the engine started, he slammed his foot on the gas. The car skidded on the dirt road before speeding away. In the rearview mirror, he saw the woman standing in the doorway, watching them. Her grin was wide, too wide, and her eyes glowed in the dark. They didn't stop driving until they reached a main road. Only then did they pull over, gasping for breath. "What the hell just happened?" Jason asked, his voice shaking. Danny took out the map again. "Let's see where we went wrong." Mark ran his finger over the roads again. But something was off. There was no record of the road they had taken. No sign of any cabin. Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "But we were just there." They sat in silence, their minds racing. No one knew what to say. Eventually, they decided to keep driving, refusing to look back. They never spoke of that night again. But sometimes, when Danny was alone, he would dream of the cabin. And in those dreams, he would hear the old woman's voice whispering, "Stay." The Vanishing Man Jessica and her cousin Nate had always loved road trips. They enjoyed the open road, the fresh air, and the sense of adventure. This time, they decided to take a drive through the mountains. It was a peaceful evening, with the sun setting behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The winding road felt endless, surrounded by thick forests on both sides. "This is beautiful," Jessica said, rolling down her window to let the cool air in. Nate nodded. "Yeah, but it's getting late. We should find a place to stay for the night." Jessica checked her phone. "No signal. I'll look for a motel when we get to the next town." They drove in silence for a few more minutes, enjoying the quiet. But then, something strange happened. Up ahead, in the middle of the road, stood a man. Nate slammed the brakes. The car skidded to a stop just a few feet away from him. The man didn't move. He just stood there, staring at them. His clothes were old and tattered, and his face looked pale. His posture was stiff, unnatural. Nate honked the horn. "Move, man." The man didn't react. He only smiled, a wide, eerie smile. Jessica's heart pounded. Something felt wrong. "Just drive around him," she whispered. Nate hesitated, but nodded. He put the car in reverse, planning to go around the man. As they moved, Jessica got a better look at his face. Her breath caught in her throat. The man had no eyes. She let out a scream, and Nate swerved the car around the figure. As they sped past him, Jessica turned back to look. He was still there, standing in the same spot, still smiling, still watching. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Their hearts were racing, hands shaking. The road twisted and turned, but their thoughts kept going back to the strange man. What the hell was that? Nate finally said. I don't know, Jessica replied, hugging herself. But let's get far away from here. They drove faster, hoping to reach a town soon. But the road stretched on, with no signs, no houses, nothing, just endless trees. Then, the radio crackled. Static. Jessica glanced at the radio. Is it picking up a station? The static grew louder, and a faint voice whispered through the noise. I saw you too. Jessica's blood turned cold. Nate turned off the radio. That was weird. Jessica forced a laugh. Maybe it was just interference, but she didn't believe that. Not really. Finally, they saw lights in the distance. A small gas station and a rundown motel stood at the edge of the forest. Relieved, they pulled into the motel's parking lot. Inside, the place smelled old, like dust and something damp. The receptionist, an old woman with tired eyes, gave them a key without much conversation. Room 107. Once inside, Jessica immediately went to the bathroom. She needed a moment to breathe. She splashed water on her face, trying to shake off the fear from earlier. Then she looked up at the mirror. Her stomach dropped. Written in shaky letters across the glass were the words, I saw you too. She stumbled backward, heart hammering. Nate, she screamed. He rushed in and froze when he saw the mirror. We're leaving, he said immediately. They grabbed their bags and ran to the car. As they drove off, Jessica checked the back seat, half expecting to see the man sitting there. But they were alone, or so they thought. The road home felt longer than it should have. The trees seemed darker, the air heavier. Every so often, Jessica looked out the window, expecting to see him. Then, just as they reached a stretch of road with no streetlights, the headlights flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, Jessica saw him, standing by the side of the road, smiling. She gasped, and the lights came back on. But he was gone. Did you see that? She whispered. Nate nodded, gripping the wheel tighter. I'm not stopping. They sped home, locking the doors as soon as they arrived. Jessica checked every window, every room. Nothing, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his smile. Then, sometime after midnight, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I saw you too. She dropped the phone, heart racing. It wasn't over. It would never be over.